Long before anyone stamped a ruler's face onto metal, a Mesopotamian farmer stood before a clay tablet with his harvest already divided into numbers. Some grain belonged to his household, some to hired workers, some to the temple, and some existed only as a debt a scribe had written down. That tablet reveals the deepest change money brought to ancient society. It turned relationships between people into quantities that institutions stored, compared, transferred, and enforced. Money did not begin because humans grew tired of swapping goats for pottery, since early communities rarely depended on long chains of direct barter. People exchanged goods through family obligation, customary gifts, shared labor, long-term credit, and promises that whole communities remembered in a world where reputation carried real economic weight. Barter surfaced mainly between strangers and across cultural boundaries, never as the universal starting point the familiar textbook story describes. The decisive innovation was a common language for measuring what people owed one another rather than a convenient object for shopping. In ancient Mesopotamia, barley and silver worked as units of account even when no barley or silver physically changed hands. A worker's ration, a merchant's loan, a tenant's rent, and a legal penalty all became comparable once scribes expressed them in the same standardized quantities. Temples and palaces sat at the center of the system, collecting crops, controlling land, employing laborers, and distributing stored goods. Their administrators needed to track thousands of deliveries and obligations across the seasons, and that need turned writing and accounting into instruments of economic power. Clay tablets recorded who had delivered grain, who had received wool, which field belonged to whom, and when each debt came due. Money developed alongside bureaucracy because large institutions needed an abstract measure that traveled farther than personal memory ever could. Once an obligation became a number, it outlived the conversation that created it and entered a permanent administrative world. A debt no longer depended on two people remembering an agreement, since a tablet let officials, heirs, merchants, and courts recognize it long after the fact. This made economic cooperation possible across greater distances and longer stretches of time, and it also handed creditors a stronger claim over the future. Farmers borrowed seed before planting, households borrowed food after failed harvests, and merchants financed journeys whose returns arrived months later. Credit tied present survival to future production, turning next season's grain into something that already belonged, at least partly, to someone else. When harvests failed, the debt remained anyway, and a tool built to coordinate resources became a mechanism for transferring land, labor, and personal freedom. Interest enlarged obligations over time, and missed payments placed fields, homes, family members, and debtors themselves under creditor control. Ancient rulers responded by repeatedly canceling personal debts and restoring lost land because mass insolvency threatened the tax base, military recruitment, and the stability of the kingdom. These cancellations were political repairs meant to stop creditors from absorbing the very population that sustained the state. Money had already exposed to permanent conflict. The same enforceable obligations that expanded trade also concentrated power the moment repayment became impossible. For centuries, these monetary systems ran largely on accounts, weighed metal, stored grain, and legally recognized promises rather than pocketfuls of coins. A merchant accepting silver cared about weight and purity, so every transaction demanded scales, testing, and trust in whoever handed over the metal. Coinage changed that process by placing a recognized authority directly onto a standardized piece of metal. In the 7th century BCE, rulers in Lydia produced early coins from electrum, a natural mixture of gold and silver found in the region. The stamped mark declared that a piece met an accepted standard, cutting out the need to weigh and inspect every payment from scratch. The stamp linked everyday transactions to the authority that guaranteed the coin, well beyond simply speeding up market exchange. A ruler gained something equally valuable from this, the power to define acceptable payment and produce portable units for soldiers, officials, suppliers, and taxpayers alike. Armies had always consumed enormous resources, and coinage made it far easier to support troops operating far from royal storehouses. Soldiers took compact metal payments and spent them in local markets, spreading the ruler's monetary standard everywhere the army marched. Taxes closed the loop by creating demand for those same coins among people who otherwise had little reason to use them. Once a state demanded payment in its own currency, farmers and craftspeople had to enter markets to obtain it, selling crops, tools, labor, and livestock. Local production turned into taxable activity measured in the state's chosen unit, and coinage spread through a cycle connecting military spending, commercial exchange, and compulsory taxation. The state paid soldiers in coin, soldiers spent it among civilians, and civilians handed part of it back to the state as tax. Money did not simply emerge from markets and later attract government attention. Governments actively built markets around their own fiscal needs. Greek city-states turned this bond between currency and political identity into a highly visible system, stamping their coins with local symbols that circulated far beyond the cities that issued them. Athens placed the head of Athena and her owl on silver coins recognized across the eastern Mediterranean. That silver came from the mines at Laurion, where coerced labor supplied the metal behind Athenian naval power, public spending, and international commerce. A small coin in a merchant's hand carried an entire chain of power linking mines, slavery, warships, tribute, wages, and trade. Athens required payments within its sphere of influence to conform to Athenian monetary standards, turning a trusted commercial coin into an extension of imperial reach. Standardization helped merchants compare prices and settle transactions, while whoever controlled the standard gained leverage over everyone who used it. Money made distant goods commensurable, placing Egyptian grain, Greek pottery, timber, weapons, and human captives inside the same numerical framework. This comparison widened trade, because buyers no longer needed a perfect match between what one person offered and another wanted. A potter sold vessels for coins, kept the purchasing power, and later traded it for food from someone who had never needed pottery in the first place. Value became transferable across products, people, places, and time, building a far denser network of specialization. Craftspeople devoted more of their lives to a single trade, because money connected their narrow output to the full range of daily necessities. Marketplaces expanded, merchant networks lengthened, and urban populations came to depend increasingly on transactions rather than direct access to farmland. That freedom carried a new vulnerability with it, since anyone separated from land, tools, family support, and stored food now depended entirely on earning money. Monetary economies produced clearer prices, and those same prices exposed scarcity with an impersonal precision. A hungry person without money stayed excluded even while a market stall stood full of grain. Earlier communities had organized much of life through status and reciprocal duty, while money introduced transactions that ended cleanly the moment payment was made. A buyer no longer needed to belong to the seller's family, worship the same gods, or promise a future favor. This opened exchange between total strangers, and it also let economic relationships turn shorter, colder, and easier to walk away from. Money relocated trust from personal relationships into coins, records, laws, courts, and issuing authorities. The relocation reshaped social power because institutions now decided which debts counted, which payments were valid, and what happened when obligations went unpaid. Written contracts strengthened property claims, and courts turned numerical promises into seizures, forced labor, and legal penalties. Land acquired a monetary price, labor acquired a wage, and damages acquired fixed payments that treated unlike injuries as comparable losses. These measurements simplified disputes, and they also compressed entire social realities into values recognized by administrators and judges. The transformation reached politics too, because citizens who received wages for military service, jury duty, or public office gained new access to civic life. In Athens, public payments let poorer citizens spend time performing state functions that wealthier households could already afford to perform unpaid. Money strengthened both hierarchy and participation at once, depending entirely on who issued it, who received it, and which obligations it enforced. Conquest accelerated monetary integration by placing different peoples under one shared system of taxes, military expenses, and long-distance supply. Alexander's campaigns carried widely recognized silver coinage across territory stretching from the Mediterranean into Asia. His successors kept producing coins based on familiar designs, because recognition outlived the ruler who had created it. A trusted currency carried political power beyond a single king's lifetime, letting later regimes inherit commercial habits that earlier conquest had already built. Rome expanded the same principle on a scale that tied provinces, armies, cities, mines, and ports into one vast fiscal system. Roman authorities collected taxes, paid soldiers, purchased supplies, financed construction, and moved wealth between regions through coinage and accounts. A tax collected in one province financed troops stationed in another, separating local production from the place where its value was finally consumed. Roads and ports served military control first, and they also lowered the cost of moving goods through the monetary economy surrounding the empire. Coins carried imperial portraits into daily transactions, making political authority physically present in markets, workshops, taverns, and soldiers' purses. The image never guaranteed honest government, but it declared exactly who claimed the right to define the unit everyone was using. That right became especially valuable once rulers faced expenses greater than their available supply of precious metal. Roman emperors cut the silver content of coins while keeping their official denomination unchanged, squeezing more currency out of the same stock of bullion. Debasement supplied resources for immediate payments, especially military expenses, and repeated reductions wore down confidence in the currency's underlying value. Sellers responded by raising prices, demanding better coins, or avoiding monetary exchange altogether once official denominations stopped matching the metal and goods people expected. War, political instability, disrupted production, and heavy taxation all damaged the economy together, well beyond the simple fact that more coins existed. Monetary breakdown revealed how much ancient society depended on shared expectations about future acceptance. A coin worked because the next person accepted it, tax collectors recognized it, and the issuing state stayed powerful enough to defend its own standard. Once those expectations cracked, metal returned to the foreground, and people judged coins by weight and purity rather than by official markings. States answered with price controls, new coinage, stricter collection, and a greater reliance on taxes paid directly in goods. The Roman state had never actually outgrown grain, cloth, animals, and labor. Money had simply organized these resources more efficiently for as long as confidence held. Other ancient civilizations built their own monetary systems through their own institutions, materials, and political struggles. In China, bronze objects and regional currencies gradually gave way to standardized round coins under expanding states. After unifying rival kingdoms, the Qin dynasty imposed common weights, measures, and coinage across every territory under its control. Standard money helped officials collect revenue, provision armies, and administer regions that had previously run under competing rules. Uniformity lowered barriers inside the empire while wiping out the monetary independence of every conquered state. In ancient India, punch-marked silver coins supported expanding trade, taxation, and state administration across growing urban and political networks. Across every one of these regions, the materials differed, while the underlying pattern stayed the same. Money expanded wherever institutions needed value to move across distance and authority. That movement changed how wealth itself was understood, because land and livestock stayed visible possessions while money stored claims on countless different possessions at once. Coins concentrated purchasing power into a portable form, making wealth easier to transport, conceal, steal, inherit, tax, and accumulate. A prosperous household no longer needed all its wealth tied up in fields or storerooms, since part of it now traveled inside a chest or a ledger. Merchants converted goods into money in one port, carried that value elsewhere, and rebuilt it into an entirely different collection of products. Portability opened up opportunity, and it also handed conquerors a compact target the moment a city fell. Victorious armies seized treasuries, melted down foreign coins, and restruck the metal with new symbols, turning conquest into monetary succession. The metal stayed the same while the authority stamped onto it changed, proof that currency joined physical value to political recognition. Money also changed time itself by giving future labor and production a present-day price. Loans moved resources toward planting, construction, trade, and war before any of those activities had produced a return. Interest rewarded the lender for giving up control of that wealth, and it placed the borrower's future under a growing numerical obligation. This financed ventures far larger than any single household's reserves could support, while failure transferred assets toward whoever was already wealthy enough to survive a delayed repayment. Monetary wealth accumulated differently from ordinary goods because claims multiplied through interest without rotting like grain or aging like livestock. Ancient laws repeatedly regulated interest, collateral, repayment, and debt bondage because private contracts kept producing public instability. Rulers needed creditors to finance commerce, yet they also needed farmers, soldiers, and taxpayers to stay independent enough to support the state. The tension between protecting contracts and preventing social collapse became one of money's most enduring political problems. Even the most successful monetary systems never fully replaced older forms of exchange. Families kept sharing resources, villages kept trading labor, states kept collecting goods, and elites kept giving gifts to build loyalty and obligation. Money entered this crowded social world and reorganized it by supplying a single measure that connected transactions once governed by entirely different customs. Once everything was expressed in the same unit, a day of labor stood beside a sack of grain, a military fine, a plot of land, and a captured person. That comparison made administration more efficient, and it also let human beings and essential resources sit as entries in the very same account. Money expanded choice for those who possessed it while expanding discipline over those who owed it. It weakened barriers between strangers, strengthened the reach of states, deepened specialized production, and gave creditors durable claims over other people's future work. None of this came from metal alone. A silver disc without shared rules was nothing more than a piece of silver. The real invention was the system surrounding it: measurement, records, enforcement, taxation, public authority, and collective confidence in future acceptance. Ancient money succeeded because farmers, merchants, soldiers, officials, and rulers all entered that system for completely different reasons. The merchant wanted a reliable payment, the soldier wanted portable wages, the ruler wanted taxes, and the debtor wanted access to resources before the harvest came in. Their interests never aligned, yet one monetary structure connected all of them, so that each person's choices ended up affecting everyone else. This is why money changed ancient societies far more profoundly than a faster method of buying and selling ever could. It gave governments a longer reach, markets a wider field, individuals more flexibility, and inequality new ways to reproduce itself. It turned wealth into something mobile, obligations into something permanent, and political authority into something carried through ordinary hands. The Mesopotamian farmer facing that clay tablet was caught up in a transformation far larger than the grain recorded beside his name. His harvest had become tax revenue, temple inventory, creditor property, worker rations, and evidence inside an administrative system all at once. Money began changing society the moment value stopped belonging only to objects and became a claim that institutions recorded against people, resources, and time.